So I don't know if you caught this or not, but I follow Cardano a little bit more closely than you do. And so one of the things that came up on my feed the other day was this interview that Charles Hoskinson did with the Financial Times. And it was a kind of just remote interview. So he was on his own, computer, and then she was doing it remotely. And it was an interesting conversation, right? Because the reporter was, some people on the in the Cardano community, the Cardano people can be a little bit culty, I think, a little bit. They were very critical of the reporter because she was asking questions like, well, Cardano is down 90% and, it's fallen by this much and you were worth this much money in the bull market and now you're down by this much. And how can investors who are thinking about investing in crypto even wrap their minds around tokens where the value has fallen by 90%, given that there are like, whatever 50,000 tokens in the world right now. I mean, maybe more or less, I don't know what it is. And it really, the set of questions were coming from a person who obviously had a some knowledge of the crypto marketplace, but not that much knowledge of the cryptocurrency technology or even like the philosophy behind like decentralized money. And so I think a lot of the criticisms were coming with, that spirit is like, listen, you're talking about price here and you're talking about the markets and you're talking about like, who cares? The reporter says, well, who cares if Cardano had an NFT event recently, like, Solana has NFT events or so and so has NFT events. Why does any of this stuff matter? And I had similar sentiments. The reporter was kind of annoying me because, these are not like great questions to ask like a founder of a project when you have them in front of you. It's like, well, why should I buy your token? It was kind of essentially, if you really boil it down, that's kind of what she was getting at is like, why should some ordinary investor buy a token that's down 90%? But some of the comment sections had very insightful like pushback against the irritation that a lot of the commentators were having, and their perspective was, these questions that the reporter is asking, that's what your ordinary person who doesn't really understand crypto very well is also asking.
Hmm.
So if you understand like the idea of decentralized money and this is why we're doing this and this is what the problem with the fiat system, then by all means the market price at any given moment doesn't really matter, right? But that's not most people. And so it really highlighted to me how the um, vast majority of people who have bought, and a lot of people got in crypto last year with, the mania that was 2021, and they never really, looked into the use case or the philosophy of this thing before they got in. I think both me and you got in like some bear market in the past, and obviously, if you're buying something in the bear market, you have a reason other than just like, the price, because the price is in the toilet, right? And you have to have confidence that you're investing in something that has some real utility and has some real use in the world. But a lot of people who got in last year are just looking at, colossal losses, and they bought at the top a technology or a token that they didn't really understand to begin with. And so there's a lot of this resentment and a sense of just suspicion that all of this stuff, this is all scams.
Yeah, I mean, that interview, I guess later you can send it to me, but I know Charles does a lot of AMAs recently, but I didn't see that one with that interview or the interviewer you were talking about. But I mean, yeah, even this past Sunday at the meetup, I brought this up to like Isaac and Sanat. I think just, like, I don't know about you personally, but I feel like the more I get into crypto, I get more just down the legacy system rabbit hole because, I've used the analogy before. I think I stole this from Lynn Alden, but it's, this thing we call the economy is a big puzzle piece, right? And, the last 20, 30 years, there's been some major pieces missing. And you can make an argument that some cryptos will solve them. Now, to your point, on the utility side, probably one out of 100 projects is actually going to be here in 10 years. So what pieces are missing from that puzzle we are going to call the greater economy, and can any crypto stuff replace it right now? Because I think a couple people at the group have jokes about this, but you were asking when I got into the market. Unfortunately, I was like a lot of people now. I got in around May of like the 2017 bull market, so basically within a calendar year, I was stuck holding some pretty bad bags. But yeah, through that like 2018, 2019 bear market, I would try to talk with friends and family and be like, oh, you should look at this crypto stuff, this, that, and the third. And they go, oh man, that Bitcoin thing's a scam. At least the US dollar is backed by gold. So that goes to like my base thesis I'm always talking about, where I
Right.
think like when you're talking about with that interview and the average person, I think even the average person just in America, how severely undereducated they are just about basic finance. It's a pretty steep hill just to get them over that, then get them down the whole Bitcoin, orange pilled rabbit hole.
Yeah. I mean, it's we've had some people come to our meetups, and I remember one of them asked me, like, why should I buy, any token at all? Why should I buy Bitcoin, right? And my response to her was, um, and this is kind of the way that I've started approaching conversations about why any of this stuff has any value at all, right? Because it's a complicated question to answer, and it's not something that you can do just like in a few sentences. And I say,
Not
listen,
for
this
real.
conversation has to start off with, what is your understanding of what money is? If you give me the answer to that question, then we can start from there, right? And then we can talk about the soundness of different like money systems. One of the words that I've started using recently to describe Bitcoin, or, gold, or the US dollar, or whatever it is I've started using the word monetary network, right? Because the words cash and money and proof, store of value, and all of that, these all get conflated, and it becomes a little bit difficult to like separate those out. And so one, um, I think, term that I really like using is monetary network, because it encapsulates, the fact that you're using some sort of a money kind of thing, but more importantly, that it is a network, right? And that all kind of moneyed systems are really just networks that are as useful as the number of people that are bought into and adopting that network, right? So, like the telephone, for example, is a network to some extent. The telephone is not a monetary network, but it gives the example of the network effect, which is that if, you and I are the only two people who have phones, they're only useful to you and me. But if everyone in the world has a phone, then suddenly the utility of the phone that I'm holding is exponentially high, because I can call anybody else with that phone. And it's the same thing with monetary networks, right? And so the idea is that Bitcoin is another monetary network, and it will be as valuable as the market decides it is, which is connected to the number of people that are going to be adopting it. And then the question begins, okay, well, why would people adopt it at all, right? And it's not because of number go up, it's because Bitcoin has certain properties to its monetary network that are different than, and arguably superior to, the current monetary networks that are in use today, right? And money is just such an intrinsic thing, right? It's just so like, deeply ingrained into our culture that, even a 3-year-old understands like what, they understand like this dollar bill you give them can actually buy them like a piece of candy, right? They're not thinking about like, well, what is it backed by and how does all of this stuff work? It just, from a very early age, you just have you're introduced to, you're just thrown into a world where the idea of what money is never really even considered, because it's just such a basic part of our society that it just never thought about, and then when you actually start to, open up that omelet, and then try to figure out what's in it and how it actually works, you find out it's actually a lot more complicated than you think.
No, yeah, sorry. I think like one thing you hit on too that I kind of harp on at the meetups, and especially like my running joke, like I'm like a functional Bitcoin maxi. I think one reason too it's kind of hard to onboard new people just into Bitcoin, let alone crypto. It's like for example, back to your network state point. Internet isn't useful if 2 people has it 2 billion people have it. Internet's worth a lot of money. Or it just has a lot of intrinsic value and utility. I think the problem with Bitcoin starting in like in the last 6 months, especially, I've been thinking about this a lot more with macro and internal crypto stuff going on. It's what is Bitcoin? Because I know I've pushed on this a couple times. I know there's some old blogs that are public now by Satoshi, and especially when he worked with like Gavin Andreessen, and then that became the whole about 2 3 years later the block wars and Bcash and stuff like that. But I think how do I word this? That's one thing too. When people ask me about Bitcoin, they go, "Well, isn't it too slow for cash?" And that's one thing I respond with. I say, in my opinion, personally, I don't think it's meant to be used cash as how we think of fiat currency. I think it's more of just a standard backing and actually like gold 2.0. It has uh, like what's the word I'm looking for here? It's non-fungible, and in that the utility is the solidity of it. Just like gold. Because for example, in 2008, the issue wasn't money. We printed almost $1 trillion in 2008. The problem was people had all this saving in their bank account. They'd worked hard, and then they basically inflate the money supply, and their purchasing power goes down. So that, like, back to your point on how to even just like give people like a 5 minute TED talk on it. I think that's the first thing too, is just explain the different components of Bitcoin, and then is the utility value network and the technology, are those all for the same thing? Are they all different things? And then each one of those, like just each one of those little boxes could be like an hour conversation in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, the conversation about money is like a very complicated one, right? Because it's, like I said, something that people take for granted. And then when and when they come to a meetup group, or, anyone who was, say, buying in 2021 last year, and especially if they were buying in the hysteria, they were not like philosophically inclined, like if they would come to our meetup and they were like, well, why should I buy Bitcoin? And my response to them is, well, tell me what you understand money is. I don't think that, those are the receptive audience, or those kind of people are receptive. They're basically just coming to, say, a meetup group, so like they can get some hot tip on, like, how to make a quick, 2x or 3x or whatever it is, because they hear everyone else is doing it, right? And so these kind of conversations are best had, I think, in a bear market like we are in today, because in a bull market, everyone is just, their eyes are just glazed over with, like, the Bitcoin like symbols in both eyes, and they're not interested in discussing philosophy of money, or like why any of this stuff makes sense. They just want to know what's going to be like the next 10x opportunity. So this is the perfect time to sort of double down and like just spread the word and educate people about, listen, this is in order to understand Bitcoin, you have to first understand what money is, right? And ask yourself seriously if you really do understand it. As you said, most people think the US dollar is backed by gold. But even if it was backed by
I
gold, which
think,
it's not, of course.
sorry to cut you off. I think rough estimates, like when they have those just like TikToks or Instagram of people going on the street, I think a walking numbers like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Americans think we're like tangibly, like you can almost do like an audit on it, and you could prove how much is backed by X, backed up by Y, something like 1 in 5. So it's pretty high when you start doing the math on that.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that, even if it was backed by gold, right? The next question is, well, what is gold backed by? And then if that's backed by something, which it's not backed by anything, right? And so then the question is, well, why is gold valuable? Why does that serve as some sort of a base monetary layer on top of which you can back other things, right? And obviously there's no answer to that question, because at the end of the day, yeah, money is an abstraction, right? We all agree that this monetary network that we've created has value, because it allows us to trade in units of economic value. And that's the other thing, is you have to sort of define what economic value, the term economic value is, right? It doesn't exist anywhere. Just like, concepts of justice and human rights and democracy, they don't exist in the physical world. These are also complicated abstractions that we have used to organize societies around. Money is similarly a very complex abstraction that does a lot of very incredibly useful things. We would not have the modern world today if we didn't have, units of economic value, right? A unit of, I don't have a good definition, because I'm just making up these terms as I struggle to try to like communicate effectively to layman people who might be thinking of getting into cryptocurrency in a bear market. I'm coming up with these terms to try to explain to layman people, so they don't have to like read 10 books, or like debate with toxic Bitcoin maximalists, who may be borderline hostile. I say, well, listen, the first thing you have to understand is that there's such a thing as economic value, which is this sort of an abstractive unit of thing. Again, it's an abstraction, so it's not a real thing, but it's a thing that if it's traded, you can get people to do things for you for it, right? Or you can purchase things for it. It's basically almost like tokenized reciprocity. Is, I will give you this token, it could be $1, it could be an eggshell, it could be a bag of coffee, or salt, or whatever it is the money network is. And in return for giving you this economic unit of dollar, Bitcoin, bag of salt, or whatever, you're going to go clean my lawn today or whatever it is, right? Because I gave you this thing. And so what is being transacted there is what I call a unit of economic value. And then the next question as well, how do you formalize and systematize these units of economic value? And multiple systems have arisen. Gold, which is one of the most widespread and one of the most commonly used, that is a good system of economic value. And then you can talk about, well, if you want a good system, this system should have the following properties, right? And we talk about, fungibility and easily identifiable and long lasting and easily divisible and recognizable. So, the unit of economic value within a monetary network has to have certain characteristics as well. But again, like I've already overcomplicated it, right? But I don't know that you can simplify it much further, right? I mean, you have to go through these steps. You have to understand, if you really want to understand it, you have to go through these steps, unless you know of
Yeah.
another way, a simpler way to explain it.
Well, not even that. I think like back to the just the base point. What is money? Like for example, what gives the U.S. dollar in 2022 value? I think let's go over this. I think there might be three or four schools of thought. So there's a really blunt one where it's basically backed up by the U.S. military. Like end of the day, people,
Guns.
all these, oh yeah, if all these countries come for their IOUs, we have guns. I don't like to entertain that one too much. Is it more of the psychology like we're mentioning? People believe that a $20 bill is 20x valuable than a $1 bill just because they believe so. Is it the like just the portability and ease of use? Like for example, with like OPEC or like if you even go as a tourist to certain parts of the world, they'll take U.S. dollars just because in their own currency they might even convert it back to U.S. dollars. That's three or four there. It's I feel like I'm missing another argument right now, but this goes back to the point where it's even most economists and I know Eric Weinstein was joking about this a while ago, like when all this money printing was going to storm. He said, "Give me your top 5, 10 economists. I will bet." Like he just threw out like $50,000 a sum of money. They can't explain to me like what the dollar is, what drives the dollar, and how it like influences the economy. And oh yeah, I guess like the fourth one I was thinking of is the dollar valuable because it's just basically like how do I word this? It's uh, it represents like past energy. Like I know Michael Saylor and the people of the world will make that argument for Bitcoin that is stored energy. A lot of people are like, oh,
Mm.
if I go to McDonald's or Whataburger and I spend $15 and I make $30 an hour at work, is this worth me working 30 minutes to acquire this meal? So I know some people, and that goes to our point on like trying not to overcomplicate it. I think even getting to like the base thing of like what is the dollar and where its like inherent value drives from comes from. There's like five or six drivers behind that.
Well, I am a bit more sympathetic to the view that it's guns. I mean, that's maybe an oversimplification, right? But
Like just real
the
quick, if you had
the
to put it on a scale, like the U.S. military like industrial complex, like if you had to give it a scale of 1 to 10, how much of that gives the U.S. dollar's value for you at least?
Well, I wouldn't use the word military industrial complex because that's a separate thing. But I would use, the military dominance of the United States. Let's just use that term, right? And to what extent is the dollar strength connected to that? I would say it's almost 100%. But
Okay.
I don't mean to I don't mean to say that the world is held at gunpoint by the U.S. military to enforcing them to use the U.S. dollar. I think the reason is that the U.S. military the United States has the strongest economy in the world. And so and as the richest economy in the world, the biggest one and the richest one, the most innovative one, the one that seems to be, has been historically stronger than all the rest. And because of that fact, it has a strong military and is able to dictate terms. And so, as you know, with the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II, the U.S. was the only major economy in the world that did not have significant damage inflicted back home. Right? Japan was destroyed, Germany was completely
Germany.
destroyed, Europe was destroyed. No, nothing had happened. There was besides Pearl Harbor, there was barely really any damage that the United States saw, and so it had a revitalized military because of all the wartime spending. It had a strong industrial base because it built that up during World War II, and that industrial base was still standing at the end of World War II, which is more than can be said for the other powers in the world. And so in that position, they said, well, listen, we still have a strong military. We have all of these resources. You're going to start trading oil now in US dollars. And oil is what makes the world go, right? At the end of the day, the economy is really an energy-based economy. So energy is what results in economic growth. You could argue that the entire industrial revolution was because we were able to turn energy into power. You could take potential energy stored in oil and we could run engines with it, right? And so and whatever powers that is what powers economies. And if you have a military that says, listen, this thing that runs everything, which we call oil, you have to use our monetary network to purchase it. Right, and that's been the case for the last 80 years, and they could enforce that because at that time they were the only industrial power that was left standing, and on top of that, they had the strongest military. So in a sense, it is connected to a strong military, but I mean, you have to like kind of double click on that question and sort of look at history and parse it out. But it's definitely connected. I mean, you could draw an indirect line to the fact that it's controlled by guns, but saying that the U.S. dollar is backed by guns is a bit provocative and inflammatory. It doesn't make it untrue, but it's deliberately oversimplistic and deliberately sort of provocative. But yeah, I do think a lot of it has to do with its military strength, for sure. I think that
I
has a
mean,
lot to do with it.
in the near to midterm or like next 10 to 20 years, put a number on it, could you see where even to a point, the people that are in the military or just just even the powers behind that could basically stop playing ball. And I guess the reason I asked that is, there's a story about Julius Caesar. One of the reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire is a lot of his soldiers didn't want to take the denarius anymore. They're like, no, we want tangible, real silver, because same thing. They were just printing the denarius, like it was hotcake Skittles. So they were like, no, if we're gonna, risk our lives for you and just keep this, little charade going, we want, tangible value. And I guess like one thing too is like you said, like oil, like there's tangible utility energy behind oil. There's that behind gold. I guess a little segue here. How do you personally tell people that go like, what is the utility like energy proposition behind Bitcoin? Because this is another thing I have like 2 or 3 talking points on, and I kind of flip just depending on like where the market's at, where my head's at, etc.
I'm not clear on your question. What do you mean by the energy proposition of Bitcoin? What does that mean?
So like for example, people like the Peter Schiffs of the world say gold is valuable because you need machines, uh, capital behind it, people. You have to physically get the mines, store them, maintain them, refine the gold, et cetera, et cetera. And some people just think like, oh, Bitcoin's made. It's like, well, no, what's like an A67, like easy a couple grand. You have to have dozens of those to be competitive. You have the warehouse for that, the electric bill. So a lot of Bitcoiners like the Michael Saylors of the world, they refer to Bitcoin just like any other commodity, where the value in it is in the stored energy proposition, because once you've taken all the energy to mine a Bitcoin, the reason I guess you could say some people value that is because they know that energy's stored, because there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin and there's not going to be any more. So it's like stored deflationary energy, if that makes sense.
I think that's an interesting way to look at it, but I don't think that that's what gives it its value. Um, I think the expenditure of energy to mine a Bitcoin, which is what miners do, is just one of the many properties that all good monetary networks have, right? So, and again, by good monetary network, one of the things I'm talking about is also a monetary network that has lasted the span of time, the sort of test of history. So the US dollar is obviously just a few hundred years old. We have no idea how it's going to play out, over the next few centuries. Gold has been around for 5,000 years, right, as a monetary network. And so it's, that's sort of where we get most of our understanding of what is it that makes a good monetary network. The thing that is tokenizing units of economic value, what kind of properties does that thing should have so that it can properly tokenize these units of economic value? And the biggest one is that it should be difficult to make. Because if we just use leaves of a tree to as a mon, it's not going to work because everyone is going to be rich, and then
Well,
the whole
last
thing
last two
just
years,
becomes
you know, money
meaningless, right?
printer on Burr takes no energy, and now
Exactly right. So
people are wondering where the inflation comes from.
right, and so that I think is definitely one driver of inflation as well. If you just have more of the thing, and it's trivial to make, then it's going to be less valuable, and to some extent you see that in in the price of goods. Although there's a counter argument to that as well, which is that what if you have the mechanism to enforce the monetary network on a by gunpoint, right, which is what we just talked about a minute ago, then it doesn't really matter what the supply is because you know what? You're going to be happy and use my monetary network anyway because I've got all the guns. And if the price of your hamburger is 10% like more expensive tomorrow because I've inflated the monetary network away, well, that's too bad. I've got all the guns. You still have to, buy the hamburger a little bit more, with a little bit more of my monetary network. And the other counterpoint to the Fed printing all this money. I know that there's a lot has been said about well money printer go burr and they're debasing their currency, and I think that that debate is going to only be settled once we find out what the trajectory of inflation or deflation is, right? Because there's I think a compelling argument to be made that deflation is a thing, right? That things are getting cheaper and cheaper to produce, not more expensive, at least in the long term. I'm not talking about in the next quarter or 2 quarters. In the long term, things are getting cheaper. And the reason they're getting cheaper is because we have more and more technological know-how to be able to produce it more efficiently and with less cost of labor, right? So in the past, I mean, for example, this computer that we're both, your computer, my computer that we're using, you go back 30 years ago, it would have cost you like a small fortune, right? A king's ransom to buy the amount of power that you're using right now. And now the amount of power that's in my phone, for example, would have cost like the price of a small country if it was in the 1950s. The same way with like cars, or any kind of factory manufacturing process. If you can automate it better, then we have people in our media group who are big believers in the Tesla bot or robotics in
Yeah,
general. We they shall remain nameless, but there's something to the idea that artificial intelligence, robotics, better automation is going to eventually have the price of goods go down, and so there are deflationary forces at play in the economy. So I'm not sold on the idea that well, money printer go burr and therefore the monetary network is permanently debased, because the other side of that equation is, well, what is actually happening to the cost of production? If that's going down, then it compensates to some extent, in my limited understanding of economics, it compensates somewhat for the debasement, quote unquote, debasement of the monetary network. And so I don't know where that debate is going to go. Bitcoin is superior, though, however, because there's just no debasement in terms of printing possible. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't like make more units of it, right? And so it will in time be a deflationary currency, meaning that it will, each unit of Bitcoin will be able to buy you more and more stuff, because it's just, the network effect is increasing, and more people are, bringing their fiat energy, right? If you're thinking about it in terms of potential energy, the potential energy is moving from the fiat world into the Bitcoin world, and allowing you greater access to more economic units, to play with. Um, so yeah, these debates are endless. I think only
no,
time
yeah,
will
there are
tell.
rabbit holes on rabbit holes. Like I know Sunday, like our side of the table is kind of just going down the whole FTX, and then just like especially how like the S&P and like the Nasdaq, like blue chip, Facebook, like Peloton, Twitter companies of the world are just still getting hammered, because and then the CPI prints are slightly down, but there's that whole thing. And I know on the other side of the table they were having a whole thing of like Ethereum, Bitcoin, proof of work, proof of stake. And I mean, we were out Sunday for a good damn 3-4 hours. We
Yeah,
closed down the brewery, and it's like you can still go for 8 more hours. That's why like I
yeah.
think it's like a good talking point on just how to not even onboard people, but just kind of give them like some walking note cards where they can go home and Google for themselves. Because like yeah, it's just a rabbit hole and a rabbit hole. And then you don't even get into like why like Bcash is a thing, why Ethereum's a thing. Like with FTX, like why hot storage is a bad thing, and why you need cold storage, and what is multi-sig, and like not your keys, not your coins. Like each one of those little things is easy a 2 hour discussion, or can be, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so Doug, I actually never, we haven't gotten a chance to talk much about FTX yet, even though it's been a few weeks now. So give me your take, man. What are your thoughts on the whole thing? I'm sure you've been following it as closely as I have.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I've definitely been keeping up with it, like keeping up just as it's, you know, uh, I guess just like Sam's whole deal, and then like just I guess the main thing I know a lot of people have said is just the speed of it, how like quickly it went down. Like Three Arrows and Celsius and Terra were quick, but like FTX, I personally had nothing with them, never used them, blah blah blah. But the speed at which they blew up, pretty amazing. Like it was pretty miraculous to see, at least from my standpoint, because how do I word this? I think the speed at which it fell, again, can't really like prove this at the moment. A lot of stuff needs to get unearthed and this, that, and a third. But I think the speed at which it fell shows how fraudulent and just full of hot air it was. I think if there was a lot more, what's the word? They just had real assets on their book and real money, and it basically wasn't, a big old, ghost bank or I guess ghost exchange. It would have maybe melted apart in 3 months. But the fact within like 72 hours, like most of the carnage kind of hit the fan, really amazed me. And then I guess on that point, being it blew up so quick, I think it just validated, like I know I was talking about this on Sunday. I think just as a community, we got a lot to learn because everyone was just surprised they blew up so quick, and then just I still think there's a lot to grow in the community where we haven't learned from Mount Gox, we haven't learned from 2008, we haven't learned from the BitConnects and the Celsius and the Terras of the world, and I think this goes back to the thing on when you first onboard people. I think the reason one of the main, even though Bitcoin maxis are a little cultish, I think one of their main talking points is not your keys, not your coins. I think there's a real reason for that because you can only trust centralized entities until you can't. And I think the fact that FTX was kind of this blue chip, big, sexy, suave thing on like the color of Forbes, and then in 72 hours it blows up. I think it just shows, the community still has a lot of growing to do. At least that's at the moment, what we're 2 weeks removed from it. That's like my initial perspective on it.
Yeah, it was really amazing to see the speed, like you said, the speed at which it like blew up, right? The emperor had no clothes, basically got revealed. I've been thinking about it from the perspective of like layman people who were already burnt by Luna or Voyager, or who heard of Luna, Voyager, Celsius, and
I
BlockFi
forgot.
now.
Sorry, I forgot about Voyager
Although
too. So
BlockFi,
yeah, it's like 4 or 5 so far
yeah.
in the last 6 months.
So, obviously, if you have been in crypto for quite a while, then you're looking at it and like, all right, this is, obviously just corporate fraud. That's all it is. I mean, this has nothing to do with crypto's fundamental use case or the fact that we're trying to invent or, encourage the adoption of an alternative monetary network. We understand, that this doesn't affect Bitcoin, Bitcoin hash rate and mining. All of that stuff is still happening, right? Bitcoin code hasn't changed. Nothing's actually changed at all. But I was looking at it from the perspective of a crypto skeptic, right, or a crypto curious person who had been looking at the blowups these whole, whole last year and has been wondering, well, I missed the bull market, the time before. Is this a good time to get in? And then they see something like FTX, and even if they are convinced that, well, okay, there's nothing wrong with Bitcoin or crypto in general, and even if they educate themselves on that fact, they might just say, well, this entire market is just full of criminals. And it seems like if everyone is blowing up and if they're all just criminals and everyone's just going to go to jail, then obviously the quality of people that are in this space is problematic, and that more than anything else may dissuade them from getting into the markets in a big way. Uh, so, I am agnostic about whether the blow up has prolonged the bear market or whether it has accelerated the end of the bear market because, we basically just got a enormous flush out. A lot of people who are like, well, screw this, just left, right? They sold and left. So that's one perspective is that, well, maybe this is just going to prolong everything and it's going to take a very long time for like just normal people to come around. But then the alternative perspective, the contrary perspective to that is if you were an institutional player, and this is a good time to mention that, Fidelity, I think just yesterday announced that they are going to open a retail Bitcoin exchange. So as a retailer, so basically someone in direct competition with Coinbase now, right? Fidelity, right? So Fidelity has trillions of dollars of assets under management, and they're basically a, sort of a asset custodial service anyway, right? This is where you kind of keep all of your assets on Fidelity. They just recently opened a Bitcoin exchange. So if you're an institution or your family office, and now suddenly Fidelity of all people is going to store your Bitcoin for you. You just have to log into your account and buy whatever number of Bitcoin it is, and they're just going to store it for you. Fidelity is a trusted institutional name, and so if you're an institution, you understand that, all right, this was all FTX was just a fraud. The use case is still there, and we're still buying. And so you could imagine the likes of, say, Google or Alphabet, or name your big company, or a family office saying that, all right, you know what, I understand the fundamentals are still strong. And now Fidelity or whoever, pick your custodial is offering custodial solutions. I'm just going to go ahead and buy big. So the contrary case could be you could see tens of billions of dollars enter the space in the next few weeks and months, because institutions, they're doing their homework. They're not going to be scared off by, FTX collapsing, but retail may be left out, right? And so this is a particularly dangerous point for, retail exclusion, I think, where retail might just like go away and not come back until like there's another bull run, and then they buy at the top again. So I'm a little concerned that that might happen. But I just don't know, like, to what extent retail has been scared off, if they're ever going to come back, if they're going to come back a few years from now, or if there's enough like content and knowledge in social media and in books and podcasts and Twitter or whatever for layman people to be able to read or listen and watch so that they can actually understand what this thing is, right? Because when I got in a few years ago, there wasn't a lot of content out there.
Oh no, it was
You
terrible.
have to
Yeah,
like really work hard to find a good book or a good podcast or a good, Twitter account to
and,
follow. There
and,
was
and
not
one thing,
much, you had to figure it out yourself.
yeah, one thing you hit on is obviously there's the suits are entering the space more and more every year. But I mean, just like even recently, like Lynn Alden and I know Preston Pish has like been in the space for a while, but those two have just been like really active vocally on Twitter. They've been on everyone's podcast, this and a third. But I mean, like I would have, probably sold my firstborn if like in the start of 2017, I could have had Lynn Alden just because I mean, you listen to her stuff as much as me.
Exactly.
Just like and like the reason I bring her up too is like one thing you were saying, I don't know about the next couple of weeks or months, but let's just like the next 12, 24 months is, is more suit money, the Fidelities, the Google blue chips of the world, are they going to get into the space? Is that going to leave the average retailer retail trader out, or is it going to be on the reverse where, we can rally the troops, we go into the 2024, 25 bear market, or sorry, bull market from this current bear market, and then we get, same thing, network effect. Well, Fidelity and the blue chips of the world are like, well, if everyone's doing this right now, I need to go with them, and then that's going to attract more suits. One thing I like about Lynn Alden is she doesn't say X, Y, and Z is going to happen. She's like 30% probability on X, 40% on Y, and then what's that leave you? Another 30% for
Right.
Z. That's one thing I've been trying to do recently. Is just like at the meetups, instead of being like how screwed are we on the next 12 months? It's like what could go nuclear, what could be kind of bad, and what possibly could just stay sideways, for the next 6 to 12 months. So yeah, that's like one thing I'm trying to be just more vigilant about, because like you said, there's so much resources out there right now. If 12 to 24 months, at least for myself personally, I'm not in a better spot right now. I have nobody to blame because even 4 years ago when it was a bear market, everyone's like, all right, the party's over, kids. This crypto stuff's done. Bitcoin's over. Ethereum's over. And now my whole thing is like, not even like what's the next 100 or 1000x, because I try to stay away from shit coins for, obvious reasons. But it's, what X, Y, and Z things happen for the Bitcoin, Cardanos, the Ethereums of the world. It's like you said, to get that institutional adoption for the next bull market, and hopefully we can have these 50, 80% bear market corrections behind us.
Yeah, I think we're at I don't know if it's almost 80, but or I think it's 70. I don't know what the correction is. One of the great things, though, about all of these colossally huge and embarrassing and scandalous criminal blow-ups, right? Count them: Luna, Celsius, Voyager, BlockFi. I mean, I'm probably forgetting four of them. Is that they've been so public, they've been so widely reported. They have been um, used as a cudgel to beat Bitcoin over the head with. Like, well, look, this is all a scam. We were telling you all about the Peter Schiffs of the world celebrating and dancing on Bitcoin's grave every couple of weeks when another company goes
every
bust.
day.
The advantage of having all of this out in the public and having so much exposure to it is that if despite this, Bitcoin continues to thrive and Bitcoin's price in US dollar terms continues to go up, the hash rate continues to go up, the wallets continue to go up, the adoption of institutions and in different sites continues to go up, people were like, damn, I mean, Bitcoin survived all of that, right? I mean, me and you have like, we heard about the block wars and, Mt. Gox. Obviously, I wasn't around when that happened, but, the last bear market had its own share of blowups, right? It had the ICO craze and then all that money came and
And
most of it was just sort of stolen and lost.
BitConnect was probably
Big Connect.
like, yeah, Terra was probably the sorry, the 2021-2022 version of BitConnect, like almost to a T with how stuff happened. But it's, I mean, yeah, like, yeah, it's, and yeah, like, sorry not to cut you off there, but one thing I told my buddy like a year
No,
ago
you're good.
down in Miami is, about this time last year, everyone's seeing, Lamborghini and dollar signs every time they go on Twitter, this, that, and a third, and the meetups. But I just remember like telling my buddy, especially, because I caught the tailwind of 2017 and 2018. I told him there are going to be three major projects that blow up, and there's these can be one or two exchange that gets rug pulled. And I told him, it's going to be just like 2017, 18, but the dollar amount. And same thing too, like the Terra, 3 Celsius, the FTX blow up. This makes 2017 look like a drop in the bucket. So that's one thing that scares me, because regulations come, and so it's like obviously there's always going to be rug pulls. People are just going to get greedy. It's going to be like natural selection for finance, but it's like you can only play Russian roulette so many times until again the monkeys in suits in New York and DC, they cannot like technically ban Bitcoin, but if they just make it like illegal as almost owning a narcotic, the average person doesn't want to go get near it. So that's what I'm hoping, is that between now and the 2024 2025 bull run, that we can get the infrastructure, the education, the, like you said, just the network of intelligent people like Glenn Alden and in the rooms, and just have those out in front for people that we want to onboard. Because I think if we we do another 10x from 24 to 25, and we do another rug pull, that could probably what makes us get legislated and regulated to hell and back. So that's one thing that definitely, like I said, like probably it's not even necessarily like what you said, the internal stuff with Bitcoin, where the wallets and the hash rate. For me, it's more the external, like you said, how people visualize it.
Yeah, and then if by mid 20 23 or 2024 or whatever it is, uh, Bitcoin price is back up again. I think it's a recovery in the face of very public crypto-related scandals will bode very well. People look at it and like, yeah, goddamn, this thing is just not dying. Like, no matter what happens, this thing just keeps coming back, right? And there's this concept of being anti-fragile is like the more you're beat up, the stronger you actually get, right? And Bitcoin has been beat up in price quite a bit, although it's hard to say that it's been beaten up technologically or affected technologically in any significant way. And so if it recovers from this, it will recover in a very public way, in a way that is public, that has not been public before. So there was a thread that I caught on Twitter the other day, which where someone was asking, is this a bear market like, worse than the last bear market? I mean, is this what it feels like? Because it feels pretty awful, right? And somebody who was there at the last bear market, I didn't have any Bitcoin in the last like bull run, in 2017 or wherever that was. I got in on the end of the last bear market, so I didn't actually experience the bear market of the last. This is my first proper bear market, right?
Yeah, you're lucky. Yeah, 2017-18 was worse in my opinion, but maybe just because the I guess the band-aid effect, how quickly it got ripped off. I think like we've been like dragging out, we're almost like a wounded deer. But yeah, in my opinion, 2017-18 was way worse than this. But maybe it's just hindsight's 2020.
Well, you may be right. I mean, right in some ways, and maybe there's a different perspective in other ways. So, um, This may feel worse because the scale of the things that are collapsing is way higher, right? I mean, how
And the
many
dollar
tens of
amounts
billions of
too, even though
dollars
the
the
percentage,
dollar
yeah.
amounts? Yeah, just from FTX alone, that's like $10 billion gone, right? Luna, that was that its market cap in Luna was 40 billion, by the way, when it Luna and the UST token collectively together was worth 40 billion before the collapse started, right? So that's a whole bunch of money there. Voyager, Celsius, add them all up. So in terms of dollar terms, it's really high. But the other reason it feels worse is because there's a macroeconomic downturn as well.
Hmm.
So, it's like you turn the news on and the world is about to, go to hell in a handbasket. So, there's like no place where you go where like some investment that you have is doing well. The price of the price of housing is going up, and if you have a house, or if you're trying to buy a house, the mortgage is going up. So there doesn't really seem to be a great safe haven. But one of the other things that was very insightful that this person on Twitter responded with is that while this may feel worse, the last one felt much lonelier than this one. The one in
I,
2017, twenty
I,
eighteen felt very
I'll agree
lonely
with it. That's
because
like
there just
the
weren't
yeah.
that many people.
Well, and I wouldn't say there weren't many people. I would say it was the institution and the suits because like this is one thing I'll fight the Bitcoin maxis on is they're like, oh man, screw the suits, screw the VCs. This is like money for the people. It is, but there are certain price targets. You and I and all the people who have been in the space for a while listening know this, the numbers we're talking about. That people are like, these are check boxes we have to reach, right? Until the suits and just the real liquidity and capital comes along, we're not gonna become, a safe haven, gold 2.0, whatever buzzword you want to insert. So I mean, yeah, to that point, this one it is not as bad because even though there's stuff that's blown up, a lot of people, the Michael Saylors, and then I'm trying to think. Even like Coinbase and Kraken, man, like basically the second FTX blew up, they posted their reserves and you could see wallets and nothing had moved. So I think it's a lot better just because we have the suits now where in 2017, 2018, we're just the weird kids in the corner like huffing on glue. And now that the actual, real money's behind us now, they're incentivized to make this to work because, they have their hand in the cookie jar too, so they want it to work out. They need it to work out.
Yeah, I mean the counter narrative is though you also have like institutional interests that don't want it to work, right? And so you may have institutional clients that want it to work, and then you have another set that don't want it to work, and if they're butting heads, who wins out, who knows? But what I meant by lonely versus not lonely is that this bull market probably feels less lonely than the other one is because there's so many personalities now involved in the space that you could, for example, like the FTX thing, right? So I was working when this was going on, so I was like pretty busy. So I would just like get on Twitter every now and then and just check in like what was going on. And it was just like watching a slow motion car wreck, right? Or like over 3, 4 days, the thing was
Not for real.
unfolding. But what I really sort of what is this? What's the right word to describe this? Not excitement, but I felt almost a sense of belonging that there was a shared grief, and I was sharing this. Not that I lost anything on FTX, but I was, of course, unhappy that people lost money, and unhappy that the crypto space had yet another scandal to like go through, and this one seemed to be the biggest scandal of all. Even though I thought you couldn't top Luna, but yeah, like I thought crypto couldn't top the Luna scandal, and crypto was like, hold my beer, and then gave us
No,
FTX,
basically.
right? Uh, but the experience was shared by amongst thousands of people on social media, right? And they were all expressing their pain, and there was a Twitter Spaces that tens of thousands of people. Elon showed up, and all sorts of people showed up, and it was just, there was almost a sense of camaraderie, like, we're all in this together. This really sucks. We got hoodwinked, and, how did we get to this point? And of course, all these conversations are important and need to happen. But I understand the sentiment of the person on Twitter who said, this doesn't feel as lonely as it did last time, right? Because there just wasn't that many people involved in this space, at least publicly. I mean, Elon Musk wasn't involved in
No,
Bitcoin
that's what I
in
mean. Yeah, we've had so
2017.
much, just real money and suits, for lack of a better word, enter the space. So
Yeah, so hopefully the FTX thing at some point, besides the FTX thing, there's also this other thing with the digital, what is it called? Digital group assets, DGI, what is it called? Um, Digital Assets Group, the Barry Silbert conglomerate. I forget the name of it exactly,
Okay.
but yeah. So that's the thing that owns like it has a piece of every single thing in crypto, and they're looking for money, and they had FTX exposure. And Barry Silbert is a relatively secretive person. He doesn't really tweet that much or like speak in public. He's like a multi-billionaire, and he has one of the biggest like companies in crypto, but he's relatively private individual. And so they have been looking for money to sort of service some debts that they have. And I just don't understand if there's enough. I don't understand what's going on with that. I don't know if they are not able to find money, if they are having difficulty, if they found it. One of the things, if you're conspiratorially minded, is that, DGI, I think that's the name of the group, is deliberately, allowing some degree of uncertainty to infiltrate into the market because, it's causing the price of Bitcoin to go down. And why not just buy some Bitcoin? I think the moment like Barry Silbert says, you know what, we have no issues at all with any of our companies, we're not going to declare bankruptcy at all, and everything is good. As soon as he makes that statement, I think we will probably start going back up again. I think some degree of confidence will be restored. I think right now the market is just really skittish and wondering if this is yet another company that's going to fail. Like, just the other day, CZ was tweeting about Coinbase, and he said, "Oh, does Coinbase actually have all the coins that they say they have? Because this news article says this and this one says this. So which one is it? Is it this much or is it that much?" And that sort of stuff when, Coinbase is being questioned in public by CZ, like, hey, are you guys solvent? Right? On Twitter, right? That kind of like almost seems like a bear market bottom indicator. Like things are so bad that CZ is publicly asking Coinbase to prove that it has the reserves, right? And it's sort of the analogous situation of the bull market peak, right, where people are paying $1.5 million for like a NFT of an ape or something, right? When you look at that kind of stuff, you're like, well, this must be some, peak market bullshit, right? And when you see the CZ thing, you're like, well, is this some bear market bottom signal here? Like, if things are so desperate, I think the bear market bottom, and again, I'm not making any calls. I have no idea where the bottom or if there's more pain to come, but it's when you feel maximum pain is when bottoms usually happen, right? And man, I've been through some pain the last few weeks. Like, I mean, I don't know, is there more to come?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I think there's still two more footballs, for lack of a better word, that possibly need to get punted. Um, wouldn't surprise me if maybe they get punted in the next 6 to 12 months, but I believe it's in the ninth inning. All of the Mt. Gox, or not all, but a large proportion of the Mt. Gox Bitcoin is slowly starting to get put back. And obviously, not every dollar amount of that's going to be sold. But when Mt. Gox happened, Bitcoin was $300-500, and now even down is worth $15,000-20,000. You bet your ass that person's at least going to sell their cost basis, if not the whole thing. Because same thing, inflation, price of living, food, everything's up. And then for me, I would, I feel like I would want this to happen, but also it would like could possibly push us to, God forbid, 5 or 8K Bitcoin. I'm still amazed that Tether is still kicking. Now I know that like some people are like, market survival. If they were a fraud, they would have blown up by now. Everything else is blown up by now. But there's just so much evidence out there that Tether is a whole Ponzi scheme and a half in itself. And apparently they had some ties in with FTX, but they've also had ties with Bittrex and other entities that have had legal trouble and financial trouble in the past, and they're still kicking. But yeah, I mean, we definitely have some pain and blood in the streets, but maybe it's just because if you're in the crypto markets for more than 3 years, you kind of get numb to stuff. But I still think we have a little bit. I would say we're in the eighth inning, fifth gear of pain, but I still think we got one more to go. Like there's two or three. I won't name them right now, but there's two or three like celebrities in the YouTube crypto space. If they basically just came out and said, "All right, Bitcoin's dead," I'm like, "All right, now we bought them." But until like that happens or until Tether blows up, I still think we got some pain to go.
I can't imagine I can't imagine any YouTube celebrity who's heavy in crypto is just going to like say, well, I think I was wrong. I just don't think that's going to happen because if we're coming back to the idea of a monetary network, this is a monetary network that is basically adopted by people who are like hardcore believers, and that's really That's really why I invested back in 2018 or 17, whatever it was, at the bottom of the last bear market was I looked at like the sense of conviction that people had, and I'm like, damn, I mean, if you have a core set of people who really believe this strongly, right? Then I think this thing has a pretty fair chance of making it. That was my thesis. I'm like, right, I get it. It's an alternative monitor network. That's fine. But the next question is it going to take off and be adopted? And the reason I answered yes to that question, and it was a calculated bet back then in 2017, the reason I answered yes to that question was because I saw it had a very dedicated core group of people who just believed in it so strongly, talked about it passionately, and there was enough of them with enough capital to make me think that they would be able to keep the network effect of Bitcoin continuing, right? And the thing with network effects is that the bigger you get, the bigger you get, the bigger you get, right? Network effects tend to feed on themselves unless something fundamentally changes. Anyway, you had a comment on the Mount Gox thing. So I'm actually not all that worried at all, and I'll tell you why about Mount Gox. And so the reason is that when the Luna thing happened, as you know, like Do Kwon at that time had bought like I think it was $3.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, and he sold like all of it to defend the UST peg. I think he sold it all in like 48 hours or something. And I forget what the price of Bitcoin was, but it did drop down from something to something else. It dropped by several $1,000s. And someone pointed out that even though Bitcoin, like $3.5 billion worth of Bitcoin was sold within 24 hours, the price of Bitcoin barely, came down at all. Now, the amount of money we're talking about in Mt. Gox is comparable to what, Do Kwon sold back then to defend the Luna peg. At least that's what I read. It was, so we're not talking about like some insane amount of Bitcoin, like 1 million Bitcoin is going to be dumped on the market. We're talking about a amount of Bitcoin from Mt. Gox that's comparable to what Do Kwon had to sell when he was defending the peg, and he sold it all like very quickly, right? Like within a few, like a day or two of each other. So, whoever gets Mt. Gox money, I mean, you could imagine those people are probably going to take a long time to, sell their Bitcoin. Some of them may wait, some of them may not. But the reason I'm not that worried about it is a lot of the Mt. Gox claims have been bought up by institutions. So if you, for example, are owed any money at all by Mt. Gox because you have Bitcoin on there, then you might have been contacted by an institution a few years ago, and they're like, listen, like we will pay you XYZ money just to get to get the rights to your claim. And back then, like a lot of these rights were bought years ago when Bitcoin was not as, valuable as it is today. So those institutions, number one, probably have a higher rate of conviction because if you bought the rights a few years ago, you probably had enough conviction in Bitcoin to be, a hodler once you actually got the Mt. Gox coin. So I don't think that's like going to be a thing. Now, tethered though, I'm agnostic, about like whether it's an issue or not an issue. I don't think that I know enough about like how well they have been audited or I mean I have never really looked into it like that
it's tough,
deeply.
man. There's so much evidence that they're, they just don't have the gas they say they have in the tank. But with that, they've been in the space since I've been in the space. I don't know about in the last month or so, but I know especially during the bull market, their 24-hour volume was consistently for weeks on end, even higher than Bitcoin's, 24-hour trading volume. So it's kind of the whole thing. It's like the similarity between, or the, correlation causation between the price and value. Maybe they are a sinking ship, but it's like the market will decide that when the market decides it. At one point FTX was solvent and then they weren't. So it's, 5 years going for Tether. And but I'm like you, I'm agnostic right now. But the biggest thing is I just don't physically own any Tether, and never use it, and I haven't even used any stable coins ever for that reason. Just because it's maybe I'm not gonna try to short it, but best thing you can do if you're agnostic to it is just stay the hell away from it. Because same thing, FTX was solvent. 72 hours later, it's chapter 11.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm with you as well. I am agnostic. I've never ever held Tether ever. For that reason, I just, have this sense of like, well, I really don't know much about them, so I just like best stay away. I think that might be like the best approach here. But December is starting soon. What do you think? Are we getting a Santa Claus rally, or is might as well just bullshit about the market predictions and make meaningless predictions for a few minutes before we call it?
Yeah, I think I was talking in the group about like a week or so ago. History doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes sometime. I'm getting really hard deja vu from 2017 to the 2018 bear bull market. We were like at, I could be wrong, about 10 or 12K for like 3 months in 2017. Or sorry, let me correct myself. The 2018 going to the 2019 bear market, we just kept going lower. But we were about 10 or 12K like sideways for 3 months, and then basically the first week of January we just fell off a cliff down to like 5 or 6K. Not saying we're doing that because we just had a pretty decent shakeup from like holding at 20 to going down to 15. But I think I was saying this a while ago too. If we can end the year at 20K, I think that'll be a pretty good win with just the amount of shots we've had to take in the last couple of months with everything from Celsius, Luna to FTX, and God knows if anything else. A whole month in crypto might as well be a year, but a lot can happen between now, January 1st. But yeah, I mean, if we can hold 15K between now and January 1st, I'll be amazed. But I mean, if come January 1st, January 7th, we're touching 10K Bitcoin and everything else is down another, you know, 20-30% wouldn't surprise me. So, but I mean, if we can go into the new year holding at least 12K, 10K, I'll be pretty satisfied with that.
Yeah, man, you're bearish. It seems, yeah. I don't know that I see a 10K Bitcoin. I really don't. But then again, what the hell do I know? Like, I'm absolutely terrible at timing the markets, absolutely terrible at trying to predict what's going to happen next. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I got to tell you, if it gets down to 10K, man, I mean, I'm going to go in hard. I'm not going to
Uh,
mess around. I'm going
I,
to
I mean,
go in
I got
hard.
some dry powder ready, man. That's like my D-Day floor because again, it's technical analysis. I don't really, I won't die on the technical analysis hill. But the last real steady support we had was 10K around going into 2020. March 2020 happens. We touch 5K. When just basically the whole world froze when we were like, oh, COVID's a real thing. Everyone just get as much cash as you can. So I don't see us touching 5K, but I think our D-Day floor is 10K, and same thing too. Let's say we January 7th bounce off 10K, and then we just hit 15K within a couple of days. I wouldn't be surprised too if we just floated that for 2 or 3 months because I assume you know this too, or like you felt this. And people ask me the worst part of a bear market. It's not even the initial drop or just going down real quick because then you eventually have to hit that and then bounce up because people have their buy orders in this, that, and a third. But for me, it's like that 3-4 months of just sideways action. That's really like the worst grueling part about it for me. So I'm not even scared if we touch 10K or anything. It's just like let's say we go back up to 15 and then we just have to go sideways like that for 50, 4 to 5 months. To me, that's the real hell, the real like you said earlier, the conviction. That's where it's not even the down part; it's the going sideways for 4 or 5 months. I think that's where separates the men from the boys.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of like calm and peace that I'm feeling, just like accepting that, listen, we're just in a bear market. I have no idea when it's going to turn around. The goal to survival is to make sure you have money coming in through a job. And we're very fortunate that at least in the US, I mean, the rest of the world is kind of screwed right now, but at least in the
Yeah.
US, we have pretty good unemployment like ish, figures, we don't have rampant like unemployment and knock on wood, it stays that way, right? Because, recessions are terrible and everything, but the biggest part of it that's terrible is if you're unemployed and you can't feed your family and you can't make ends meet. And, that's when suicides, start ramping up, and that's where like, things really start breaking down, right? So, I don't know what's going to happen next year with regards to like recession or rates or whatever, but I'm really happy though that the job market has sort of like held up all this time, right? Because that's really at the end of the day what matters to just ordinary people, right? People who are just living their lives, like these the price of assets, right? If you're owning Google or the Alphabet or whatever, I mean it's numbers on a screen, right? But if you don't have a job, right, and you have a family to feed and you can't do that anymore, right? So whatever, I'm down to whatever percent on Bitcoin and the other things from the peak, but I have a job, right? And so I'm like, well, I'll just keep holding my assets and hopefully they'll go up at some point in the future. The more important thing is having a job that gives you meaning and purpose, and brings capital in so that you can sort of stack cash and get back into the market when you feel like it's the right time for you to re-enter. So, as long as the jobs like hold up, I think that the US is probably the best place to be. I mean, I think Europe is screwed, Asia is screwed, Russia is definitely screwed. Um,
I mean,
the
South
US, man,
America,
I mean,
or yeah,
South
Argentina is
America,
getting
yeah,
killed again. Yeah, I think they have like almost
rampant.
100%. Yeah, year-on-year inflation. It's insane.
Speaking of, by the way, did you catch the news that Brazil recently approved Bitcoin as, I may be overstating the case, but what the headline I heard, and it's just the headline, so forgive me if I got it slightly wrong, is that Brazil legalized or made Bitcoin legal tender, so you could just use it for payments from now on. I am not sure to what extent that's true, but it has been legitimized. I mean, the take home message that I got when I read the headline is legal tender or not legal tender, there has been a significant degree of legitimization when the bill is passed. I think it still has to be codified, so it's not finalized yet, but it took a very long time for this bill to make it past, to the stage that it's now, and it just needs to be, I think, codified and signed. But Bitcoin in a place like Brazil, if it's legitimized, is where it really shines, right? With the inflation they have over there. So if you're a Brazilian person and you're like, well, the government says that I can buy this now and it's legal and it's kosher, it definitely makes the case then that, this is a real thing. This is and this may be something I should buy to hedge against the deflation or the inflation rather than I'm seeing with my own currency, and Brazil is seeing it worse in many, many countries.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on something, I guess, to kind of like tie this back together about what we were talking in the beginning of the chat, the network effect. You know, a lot of people, especially in the Bitcoin, maxi camp, will be, screw regulation, screw this, that, and the third. I'm obviously, if you commit a crime, everyone agrees you commit a crime, you should go to jail. So I think healthy self regulation is needed. I think obviously, uh, you know, especially back in like the New York City 2013 days, a lot of Bitcoin companies had to get out of New York because the regulation was so stiff. They're like, you have to tell us, we have to prove every client's not a criminal. This is, we can't afford this. So a lot of Bitcoin companies got out of New York because the regulation was too heavy. With that said, first it was El Salvador, and now it's Brazil, and then there's probably other little countries here and there, like you said, where there's just bills. I mean, there's a couple Bitcoin crypto bills floating around in Congress right now, and the long-winded point with this is, I hope a couple more countries in the next 2 or 3 years get involved, because I think it's going to get to the point where even if there's the Nancy Pelosi's, the AOC's of the world who completely mischaracterize Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, I think they're going to have to participate, because if they keep this money printed on Burr and it's just like, the U.S. dollar just keeps running on high inflation, and, like we said with Julius Caesar and his soldiers, if people stop doing it, I think the U.S. government is going to even have to make, in the next 10 to 20 years, get at least like 5% of their reserves on Bitcoin, because they're like, if we don't do this, just literally, we might lose citizens to other countries. I could totally see that happening. So that's why when a lot of people fear like the U.S. government, like what you just said, I'm honestly a lot of South America and a lot of Africa, those countries, the citizens need the utility of Bitcoin and stable coins, this, that, and a third. So that's the thing. I think the U.S. is actually going to be. I don't feel the U.S. from a regulation standpoint with crypto, because your point is that network effect. And I could see in 10, 20 years, there's already 30 countries, and then these idiots in D.C. go, all right, we're just going to legalize it finally because we're last to the party. 1 in 2 Americans has Bitcoin. They're, this genie's out of the bottle. So it's I love it. I didn't hear about that with Brazil, but I think if we
Yeah.
can get 2 or 3 more countries by the next bull market, that could be what breaks our watershed moment. And obviously we'll have 10, 20, 30% corrections, but these 60, 80% bear markets, I could see if we get 2 or 3 more countries between like South America, Africa, these 4-year cycle bear markets could get behind us. But like you said, how do we know? We'll see. But that's good to hear if that's true about Brazil.
No, it is, yeah. So that just, I think I saw that headline just yesterday, and I have to like double click and see exactly what it is, but it's definitely a real thing. I have a semi prediction, like a predict. I'm not, I don't make predictions or anything, but I have this suspicion that there's going to be something that happens in the next 1 or 2 years, right? And that is that the Middle Eastern countries, so I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, I'm talking about like the UAE, Qatar as well. These countries are generally run by, currently relatively run by a relatively young generation of leaders, right? So obviously, MBS in Saudi Arabia is like 34 years old or something. You know, like he's really young. I believe the Emir of Qatar as well is relatively young. UAE is very progressive. You know, Dubai, for example, incredibly progressive young leaders as well. And these Dubai already is a epicenter of crypto finance. A lot. I mean, CZ went there, and there's a lot of crypto stuff that's happening. There's a lot of money. In fact, if you want to like hide from the authorities, I mean, that's I think where Caroline went. Caroline of Alameda, she escaped Hong Kong and she went to Dubai. But anyway, the point I'm making is that these countries in the Middle East are also trying to break away from the US dollar hegemony, right? So Saudi Arabia is a very good example of this, where they saw what the US did to Russia, right? They basically told Russia that, you know what, your foreign currency reserves in US dollars and in the euros, they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to us now. We're taking them, right? So that's when the war started. Russia had a lot of money in Europe, in European banks, and it just unthinkable that the rest of the EU and US would band together and just take that money from them, right? So strong was the conviction in the US monetary system and the international system of money that we're using, even with Putin, that he knowing that he would cause outrage by invading Ukraine, it never occurred to him that they would just freeze the money. We're talking about, by the way, something like $650 billion of Russian money was frozen by the EU banks. They were talking about in euros and in dollars, right? They just said it's our money now,
Yeah, I was
right?
gonna say I
And
actually thought it was
and
higher. I
Joe
thought it was eight
Biden,
hundred, but yeah.
it's still an insane amount of money.
Oh, it's
And
crazy. Yeah.
the US did exactly the same thing to Afghanistan when the Taliban took over the country, right? So they had, US dollars in their central banks that were stored, and the US just basically took them all. They just said it's our money now. So they did this twice already. Like if you piss the US off, they're just going to manipulate their monetary network that everyone is using to fulfill and to push their political ends. And you can only do that so many times with your monetary network before people are like, what is this bullshit, right? Is this now a weapon that you're going to use? Because, we all agree to use it, but not if you're going to use it as a weapon every time you get pissed off at somebody.
Or use it, internally. It's like they say, threats, foreign and domestic. The whole Bretton Woods system. They made it illegal at one point in time to own gold besides any silverware or jewelry. And then when they started confiscating, like if people had like any small gold bricks and coins in their house, military one or the U.S. government confiscated that crap at one point. Then they remarked it so the gold that they got from people was more
Yeah,
valuable. So it's nothing new.
right, right,
And
right.
then it's I mean, even not like to get on like the political side of it, but a lot of people say like, oh, government intervention would be better and stuff. And it's like with the point I just brought up, or the two you brought up, it's like you said, you can only play that Russian roulette so many times, and I think there's just so many historical examples of just the U.S. government being incompetent. So when people are like, "Oh, how could the U.S. dollar ever fail?" I'm like, "You got like 10 minutes to sit down. I can name, these 10 same thing. They did all this COVID money print, and they're like, there's not going to be any inflation. If there is inflation, it's going to be transitory. It's going to be mild." And now they're like, "Oh, this could actually be like 5 to 10 years." So as they keep moving the goalposts because, like with the examples you just said, they you know, overconfidence is really scary in a vacuum, and there's no shortage of that in American history, at least with their their financial or the financial aspects of society.
Yeah, so just to finish off what I was saying with the prediction thing was that, Saudi Arabia is seeing this happen with Russia, and, the Middle East is generally seeing it happen with Russia. They saw it happen with Afghanistan. And those Middle Eastern countries are the producers of the thing, oil and natural gas, and basically the carbon economy on which everything rests, right? If we talked about like the modern economy basically rests on a bedrock of carbon petrochemicals, right? Basically energy, right? So essentially, economies are just engines of turning one form of energy to another form of energy. That's essentially what they do. And if you have cheap energy to flood into the system, then it grows bigger. So the substrate of the economy, the blood of the all global economy, that stuff is being produced mostly in the Middle East. And if those people say, listen, maybe we want to, take a sort of a a side bet. Maybe we want to get some insurance against the United States one day deciding that, you know what, we're going to just take your money also. Uh, so the prediction that I'm getting at, the long way of making this prediction is that I think in the next 1 or 2 years, you will see publicly stated, it'll be publicly stated by one or another Middle East country that they have officially bought Bitcoin and incorporated that into their sovereign funds. So Saudi Arabia has its own sovereign fund, and all of these countries have this. They have so much money coming out of their ears that they have these sovereign funds that they use to invest in many things. Norway, by the way, another oil-rich state, has a $1 trillion sovereign fund as well. Which, by the way, they've bought MicroStrategy with some of that fund, a little bit of MicroStrategy, so they have some indirect exposure to Bitcoin. But I think you'll have the sovereign funds of, say, Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or Qatar or some of these other countries start to actually formalize their investments in Bitcoin. And just like it is with any other kind of investment, you don't want to be the first, but you don't want to be the last either.
Not for
And
real,
so
yeah.
the first of those countries that make the move, I think those countries are so competitive with each other. I mean, there's intense competition in the Middle East, and they're all vying to be like, sort of the most influential in their domains down there. That if, say, Saudi Arabia tomorrow says, "Hey, we bought like $10 billion worth of Bitcoin," which is a lot of Bitcoin, by the way. I don't think it's going to be a very far time. And like there's a lot of these Middle Easterns who have, rich Middle Eastern billionaires not related to the government who are also like buying Bitcoin, right? But not necessarily, they're not public figures, so they're not on Twitter talking about it. But I think that if that cat is out of the bag, that could be, that I think will forever cement its place, Bitcoin's place. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be, uh, we talked about well, once institutions get here, then Bitcoin will, have its, will finally, never die and it'll be safe and, it'll be considered a safe investment. But I'm going a step further. I'm like, well, what happens when countries start buying Bitcoin, right, for their national, sort of reserves? Not just institutions, not just the Fidelities of the world or BlackRocks of the world, but when countries with trillions of dollars in assets decide, hey, we're going to allocate 1% of Bitcoin from now on, then, I think we're just going to see a rocket ship go up. And I think then it will be a point of no return. No one will ever say Bitcoin is worthless and it doesn't mean anything. I think that conversation will die. In fact, that'd be a great thing to happen in the next bull run is for people to just stop asking the question, what is Bitcoin based on, right? Because unless you want to talk about the philosophy of money, that question can't be answered in 2 minutes, you know?
No, no, I mean, like I guess, just to piggyback off everything you said and kind of put like a nice T on all this is, that's I think you use the exact word insurance. That's how I use Bitcoin, man. Like, for example, I got some family members that are about 50, 55. They might be on the cutoff for Social Security before that blows up. I know a couple states like
Yeah.
New Jersey, the Kentuckys of the world, their state pensions maybe have a decade until they blow up. And a lot of these figures and numbers, these were before COVID. So, people say COVID didn't cause a lot of things; it just expedited stuff. And again, we'll find out in 5 to 10 years, how long and true that runway is. But to your point too, it's like I am making, like you said, a lot of the countries that are entertaining the idea of Bitcoin as being, monetary insurance. These are the companies, or not the companies, the countries that actually make stuff that either have a lot of commodities or they're just rich in resources, etc. Well, America's resource is just, money printer on burn. We have the biggest, army in the world. So if enough countries that make, precious metals, like you said, Middle East oil, Nordic countries that do a lot of exports. You get 10 or 12 of them, and then the monkeys in DC are looking around. They're like, oh shit, we better get a lifeboat here. And to your point, I think if in the next 4 to 5 years, if we can get that escape velocity rocket like you were talking about, I think instead of is Bitcoin dead, it's like, are we only going to go down 40% this time? So I think the next three
Yeah.
to 4 years, as we go into the next bull market, this is kind of the watershed moment for us. We either look back in 10 years and be like, this is when, like, we codified ourselves as a legit currency, people see and understand the value. Or I think if we can't finally get that escape velocity, it could be trouble ahead. But I'm optimistic, man. Like you said, I think there's enough moving balls right now where we can look back in 10 years and be like, this bear market right now is pretty rough, but this is, where we made the ground floor to, jump off of.
Exactly. Bear markets always feel bad, right? I mean, they don't feel good, right? So the pain we're experiencing is a completely normal. feelings to have in the bear market. So, for those people listening who may be despondent, just patience, time is your friend. Wait it out, hodl, do appropriate risk management, maybe DCA in. I mean, whatever, I think most important is just, have income coming in and don't depend on this thing 2xing or 3xing, anytime soon. So that you're not dependent on your crypto gains. I mean, that's a very bad position to be in, right? And definitely do not like put the vast majority of your net worth in crypto. That's also a pretty bad, position to be in as
Yeah.
well.
Well, I was gonna
There you
say
go. You're
you
smiling. So
said
it's
you said that, and then I was just like, to your
you're
point
like,
though,
oh, okay.
yeah, to your point though, it's I have no outstanding debts. I got a pretty good, obviously moving right now in Austin, which isn't cheap, but I got pretty good money coming in
All
from
right.
work. But it's like, yeah, people talk about that too. It's like, oh, I have 90% of your net worth in crypto, and it sounds cute until the bear markets, but it's like if you have you
Yeah.
know a little bit in your checking savings, you have 3 to 4 months of just life utilities. It's it's a double edged sword. When it's cool. But yeah, that's one of the things too. It's like especially now that we're in a bear market, like you said, get your DCA going. But the 70 to 90% of your net worth, that's more of like something you want to milk on when we're in the bull market. But yeah, I know, like you said, just to
Yeah.
manage your risk properly right now, because just doing a little bit of DCA now, you don't need to get anything cute, crazy low DCA now. When we hit the next bull market, you're not going to be like, oh, why didn't I put in more? You're like, you know what? I got my nice 5, 10x, which would have taken me 50 years to get the S&P 500. I'm cool. So
Right.
yeah, definitely just be
Exactly right.
intelligent, because you don't need to hit a home run right now. Just your little DCA and staying on top of the market. Well, 2 3 years next bull market, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I totally agree. All right, Doug, as always, great chatting. Great conversation as always. Let's do it again soon.